I didn't have time to prepare the presentation that I wanted to, but Freud said that maybe I should just say a few words. It sort of would have fitted better, I think, with this morning's series of presentations, but I've just recently finished a PhD about post-war poems and texts in print called Autopoetics. And I was looking at the emergence of nonlinear and digital tendencies actually in printed formats that you can see within concrete poetry and visual poetry. So I wanted to reference the first theory of text that I know about. It was created by Max Benzer in 1957, and he kept iterating it. And he was talking about nonlinear texts and various other texts. And he borrowed that in a way from Francis Ponge, who was a French prose poet. So first started talking about the text in 1949 and how the text was actually differentiated from what he called the literary object. So the literary object elevates things, whereas the idea of the text is that it could flow under and over and in between things. And this is from 1958, Visual Text, an exhibition in Stuttgart.
I'm going to change to this camera here and for everyone so you can more easily show.
That would be great.
That's this one. Then and
yeah, so the idea of the visual text then really took off, and Ponge was saying that in the 50s generally, you know, with television coming on and advertising, visual perception started emerging as a field in its own right and visual design. So within the field of poetry, you start getting a meta-linguistic turn as early as the 50s, particularly in German post-war language works. You get kind of decomposition of the poem itself from the word into the sign. So you get this kind of work emerging, which is really semiotic, and it's still being called visual poetry. You start getting frames layer over frames, all of which are based on letters. I haven't really got time to go into this too far, but I wanted to just show you some other examples of what I'm talking about. So, I mean, you can trace some of this back, of course, to futurist experimental typography and Dadaism. You get a more programmatic approach to the visual poem in the 60s. Futura typeface, which is based on a 0 and 1, a line and circle, starts to be used consistently. You get this kind of textured effect, all built up from one single letter.
more to here as well, please.
That's called cold type structures. So what you were getting was a kind of, in a way, it was a printing revolution as well as an electronic revolution, because letterpress and hot metal type was suddenly being superseded by photocomposition using light-based printing. You start getting different sort of multimedia effects. And this is the kind of work that I was looking at in my thesis. It's all built up from one character. Start seeing sort of pattern language emerging, which is, of course, very much what's coming through now in AI and the whole idea of the attention mechanism and vectors. You get all that coming through in printed formats. And I just wanted to sort of draw attention to this a little bit, because it's clearly foreshadowing what happens later, which is very much associated with digital, as in digital and electronic literature. But you're getting, you know, this is from 1965, poems that start to get moved, and they start to gradually move off the page into environmental context. So you have like poem machines start getting made that turn around. Then you get works of public art using poetry projected into different public spaces. So I can write this up for the presentation, but I sort of wanted to flag it up because I think it's been kind of overlooked a little bit. And what you find in reading back into some of the theory of text that Benzi was writing along with Haroldo de Campos in Brazil, and Haroldo de Campos wrote an essay called The Open Work of Art as early as 1955. And he's talking about this relational cyclical text, tracking it back to Mallarmé in Through Joyce. And Max Benzer in 1959 was writing literally about digital tendencies within the poem and within the work of literature, which they were talking about was an atomization and a fragmentation of the line into different elements. And once you got that fragmentation and decomposition, then the text becomes mutable. It can be moved in various different directions, and you get a non-linearity emerging off the page into the environment. And that also shows us that digitality starts, it doesn't need computation. Computation is just one way of taking that forward, but it is actually linked, I suppose, to human brain. So I could go on about all of that, but I'm going to stop now because it's too long to expand on, but happy to answer any questions.
That was not very long, but that was fantastic. Second to last presentation today, and finally someone talks about texts. Not done yet.
Okay.
I'm sure there's another question or comment. Yeah, please move over. I just want to say, you know, we are all about the XR stuff, but we make it very clear, as Fabian showed, both making XR stuff and paper. You're showing how even before these technologies, paper was being expanded and it was using technologies of different print styles and so on. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for what you showed and for whatever you want to submit as a paper to put in the book, even if it's just a few, even if they're horrible photographs, just anything, please. Thank you.
Okay, because the other point I'd make on that, just in response, is what I didn't mention is that once you look, I mean, the person I did my PhD about did use hot metal type. So if you look at something like this that he did from 1965, this is an overprinting of words. I mean, it looks like one of the spectrum synthesis that you were showing this morning. I actually wrote about this as a synthesizing process. But he's actually used hot metal type, so you can still feel the indentation on the paper. So you get this haptic quality about this material poetry, which I think we're trying to get back to. I mean, a lot of references today have been about how do we get this multi-sensory dimension. And clearly there's a lot of research going on in haptic areas. And I think we have a lot to learn from simply engaging with this kind of semiotic poetry. So,
Yeah, please go ahead and just check.
Hello, this is Leon. Thank you very much. I think this is a pretty mind-blowing experience for me, especially when you started to talk about these poet machines or these dynamic poems. Can you maybe tell a bit more about that? Because what I think is very it's a very actual topic almost, because it feels almost the same as like you have like this generated text or this chat GPT stuff, which freaks some people out and some people love it. Like, did that maybe already happen back then when people came out with these poem machines? Like, were, let's say, the traditional poems upset by this? Like, can you tell a bit more about these poem machines?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm just at the stage of studying what might be a book on all of this. So it was great to have that response, and definitely pattern language, pattern generation started then. You even get references to generative poetry in Harold de Campus in 1955, 56, and talking about vectors. So, and the thing is, if you look at it, you have to look at a lot of concrete poets. It's a bit like what was being talked about earlier. If there's a collective group of people and they're working relationally, then they're building off each other's work. So because they all started using a particular type of typography, it's almost like there's a collapse. It's a post-authorial approach. So it's decentering away from the self into like an autopoetics. So there's this collective mutation happening with one thing referencing another. And because it happens at a micro-linguistic level, someone might just change one letter. You get exactly what's going on in text generation now, except that it's also embodied, that there's a personal relationship, but a decentering and depersonalized format. And that's a critical kind of ground of emergence out of which the limitations that we now, Noam Chomsky is a key person, because he was saying that you know, the lack of meaning in chat GPT is the problem. He was saying exactly the same thing in 1961. I've just been reading one of his things about linguistics. He actually was writing that an automated text is like a parrot, you know, and this is back in the early 1960s. And now he's still alive, and he's now saying, look, there's a lack of meaning here. And that, I think, goes back to what someone was saying earlier about negation, because a lot of these poems they grew out of the post-war negation of language and a kind of an emptying out. So you get large blank spaces and a kind of spatialist approach, and, you know, punctuation sometimes is left out. And that capacity to transfer a sort of an absence or negation is what's not happening at the moment in generative text, because it's just a pattern predictability rather than a unique directionality, which is what was being written about in the mid-60s. So we have a lot to learn from going back and remembering. And maybe that's what will happen when generative text or AI starts being embodied, because then we'll get into all these issues again, I think.
Thank you.
Oh, look what's sitting in the chair.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Can I show something?
How do you-
The question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You can stay. Show it in big. My name is. So it's a Mac, right? Might need some help. How do I?
What's your-
Command tab, just like we stole from Windows.
I don't use Windows, so that doesn't.
You need a URL, right?
Yes. And then
Command L or whatever,
L.
the location, and then
Yeah.
type in your nonsense.
Okay. And I'm going to show some nonsense too. Yes. Okay.
Full PhD can be written on the 404 page.
So I have to show it because if I describe it, it's not going to help. I can't describe it properly. Okay. So that's a kind of thing I'm working on, which is a 3D space, and you can, of course, you can put it in VR and in the headset. Why do I show it to you now? Is because all the text, now though it appears flat,
Yeah.
and all the letters individually can be grabbed and then manipulated. I
Yes.
never ever considered it for poetry. And when I see what you show, well, now I am.
Great.
I don't know if it's
Yeah.
the solution for this, if it creates more problem than whatnot, but so this is of course flat. I mean, you can see an animation on top.
So you're saying you can move it as in with a cursor or something, but could you actually
So
see
you
it being
grab them with
touched?
your hand.
Nice.
So you have the headset on, like one I have here.
Yeah.
And then you see the text, you put your hand in front of it, and then you grab and you rotate, you move either the whole sentence,
Yeah.
word, or individual letters.
Yes, excellent.
So yeah, maybe that's a thing that could be used for exploration.
Definitely. Yeah.
There was a really worthwhile callback, Fabian, to that work, because we've talked a lot about today about not wanting keyboards. Keyboards are great, of course, if you have the basic training for a lot of stuff, but not for all stuff. So, with text, every once in a while, someone will remind us that text and textile have the same root
Yes.
and all of that stuff. So if we do develop these gestures, we can start weaving whole sentences. We can do a lot of stuff. So
Yeah.
thank you
And
for that.
texture is another word or something.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So thank you very
My
much.
pleasure.
So I think I'm the last one. If there is anyone else, tell me or forever hold your peace. That's not me. Anybody want any drink or coffee? We are in about 45 minutes, we're transitioning to wine. So if you want some caffeination before falling asleep.
This.
I'm not thinking of. Just get the black coffee right now.
It's nothing like black coffee.
Yeah. I saw kind of give him a prod.
Are they just chatting?
I just haven't just.
I tell them to keep
I
coming.
have to.
Okay,
Hopefully they'll.
I'll go get them.
All this like. I mean, if I were I fell asleep. Yeah. Through 9 hours. So that's certainly from like Wikipedia. Yeah, there's not enough hours for that. What's that? No, I mean on the plane. or release like this other one. But it's interesting. Well, yeah, that's why I was concentrating on so way change. There was no yeah, I saw what you're saying. So like, here's the thing, we're not saying nowhere near the three messages. That's the misunderstanding. That's the rising question. He wasn't motivated. So that's what I don't want to have to like, that's the last minute. I want to be ready to go. So whether or not it's in the go or written in research, let's keep it running. That way we don't have to spend the last
Right. So before we completely wrap up, I'm going to talk a little bit because I've hardly talked all day. That was a joke. But also, please write down stuff on that page, the About You page, because it's a lot easier for me to just copy that straight into the book. It's on the symposium page. So I saw you looked a bit confused. It's here. It's on the futureoftext.org. Click on symposium, and there's a Google Doc link right there.
Nobody filled it already.
Has everybody filled it in? Something? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. We're missing 2 people, but they will probably stagger in at any minute. Right. So, sorry, I was a teacher, just, along with Keith, so that's just how it is. Right.